Hello and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Joe and I rant about the things that I think we need to do to prepare for the coming effects of climate change. If you've been here before, welcome back. In this video, is capitalism just corporate socialism? I'm going to start this video by actually jumping to the end. I'm going to show you the last slide first and then work my way back to it. So let's jump in. So this first slide is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, year-end close, from 1960 through the end of 2020, graphed against our national debt, also from 1960 through the end of 2020. And maybe it's just me, but there seems to be something going on here where it looks to me like the more the rich don't pay their fair share in taxes and instead invest it in Wall Street, the more the rest of us have to pay for that. So it seems to me like the rich are getting richer at the expense of all of us through the government. So let's take a look at this. So first, the definition of capitalism. An economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. Central characteristics of capitalism include capital accumulation, competitive markets, a price system, private property, and the recognition of property rights, voluntary exchange, and wage labor. So, operation for profit. For profit is why we are facing climate change. It is more profitable to pollute than it is not to. If it was the other way around, we would not have pollution. We would not have oceans full of plastic, and the globe would not be getting warmer and thus changing the climate and precipitation patterns and putting us into the situation that we're now in. Let's look at another definition. A Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent investment activity that lures new investors and pays profits to earlier investors with the funds from more recent investors. Victims believe the profits are coming from legitimate business activity and don't know their payouts are coming from other investors. So the most famous Ponzi scheme was run by a guy named Bernie Madoff. I believe he died in prison recently. He was busted in 2008 after taking about $17.5 billion from investors. Thousands of people were talked into putting their money in, but the more that came in, the more that eventually needed to be paid out by more people that had to keep coming in, and he was eventually caught. But how do you get $17.5 billion out of people? Well, this guy used to be the former chairman of NASDAQ, someone investors were supposed to trust, someone who knew the system, someone who knew where the cracks were, and someone that took advantage of it. So, how does this have to do with capitalism? Well, it's my contention that traditional for-profit businesses are not how the rich make their money anymore. They're making it through Ponzi schemes through startups, as you'll see. So let's talk about the 5 stages of startup funding. And I'm going to use a bag of money. In a minute, you'll see a bag of money is going to represent around 10 million in the diagrams you're about to look at. So first stage isn't really a stage that counts here. This is the company being founded. This is the founders taking money out of savings, maxing out their credit cards, borrowing money from relatives, just getting the company to exist on paper. It's a company around an idea that is thought to be solid enough. You've done your market research, you've interviewed prospective customers, you have an idea that this is something that can take off. And so you take this, at this point you don't even have a product. You could, but you still may only have an idea for a product or a service or software or a mobile app or whatever it is. And so you get the company off the ground and you take this idea to perhaps a startup incubator, which matches you with a mentor who will walk you through all the things a startup is supposed to do. And by the end of that, or if you're able to meet up with someone your own, this idea then goes to what are called angel investors. These are people who are willing to throw money at an idea in exchange for a percentage of ownership. They don't come along and tell you how to run the business. They may provide advice. They're probably valuable resources of information if they're willing to provide some kind of mentorship. And they probably are, because now their money is on the line. But they don't actually come in and force you to do things the way that they want you to do them, because at this point they trust that you are passionate enough about your idea. You're supposedly the expert about it. You came up with this idea. And so at this point, a lot of trust is established between the angel investors and you, to the tune of, on average, about $500,000. Now, at the end of all of this, you still may not have a product or service ready for the public, but it's close. You may have a prototype, you may have what's called an MVP, or minimum viable product, something where others can look at that and say, okay, I see what you're doing. It's not ready yet, but I get what you're up to. At this point, you may go to a venture capital group, and what you're going after now is what's called Series A funding. So on average, the money that comes in from this is about $13 million, much higher than the $500,000. A VC group is going to come in and tell you what to do and how to do things. You're either going to do things their way, or they're going to bring in the people who will, whether you like it or not, in exchange for not only a percentage of ownership, which may not always be 30% at each of these stages. 30% falls in the range of what happens at each stage. So just to keep the math simple, I'm going to use that number each time. But $13 million is a lot of money, especially considering the founders put in only $30,000. So the VC group, they have some right to demand that, hey, we know what we're doing, we help businesses get going all the time, and we want things done this way with our money. So either you're going to do it their way, or they're going to bring in the people who will. And also, one thing to notice is, so if they take 30%, the angels took 30%, the VC 30% comes out of everyone else's pocket, or everyone else's ownership, I should say. No one has anything in their pocket yet, as the company isn't making a profit, may not even be generating revenue yet. But the 30% comes out of the remaining 70% the founders have. Take away 30% from that, that leaves 49. The 30% the angel investors had, take away 30% of their 30%, that leaves them with 21. The total equity of the company, the total ownership must always add up to 100%. So that's the breakdown here. And at the end of this stage, your prototype or minimum viable product is now ready, it is complete, it is for sale, and now you are generating revenue. Maybe not a profit, but you're at least generating revenue, you're generating customers, you're establishing a customer base, you're taking on other expenses you previously didn't have, like dealing with returns, customer service. These are all the things this $13 million is supposed to cover. So now you've started a company, your products or services are out there in the market, and it's doing well. People really like what you have to offer. So then you may attract another round of funding from another venture capital group, or maybe the same one. But this next round comes in on average at about $33 million. So everyone's share of ownership gets diluted by that much. And this $33 million, it's my understanding that Series B funding is the hardest to get. At this point, you have started a fire, and all you need is fuel to pour on that fire to really get this thing going. So this $33 million, a lot of it gets thrown at marketing, because now it's just a matter of informing the masses of what you have to offer, in addition to any other operational things that you have to build out, such as customer service. So anyway, at the end of this stage, you are up and running, and you are a company that people are starting to notice. So at this point, you may attract what's called Series C funding, which is because this company is growing, it's successful, it's up and coming, people are starting to take notice, and some investors may want you to go public, because this is really where the money is to be made. So a private equity group comes along, or a hedge fund, and says, hey, here's $59 million, or whatever the amount is, and let's take you public. Now this amount of money that's given during Series C funding, it's to help continue operations, it's to help continue growth, but a lot of it goes towards preparing what's called an initial public offering, taking the company public. At this point, it's privately owned, it's shared among the founders, the angel investors, the venture capital groups, and at this stage, the private equity firm. The public does not own this company yet. The books are private, but in order to make money on Wall Street, that all has to change, and apparently it costs millions of dollars to prepare an IPO, but that is the next stage in funding. So the company goes public. An initial public offering is determined to be, on average, around $353 million is what is generated here. And if you look at the breakdown of ownership at the end of the fourth stage, well, technically fifth, but at the end of Series C funding, the founder share has been watered down to 24%. The angels have 10%. The first VC group that came in is at 15%. The second one that came in is at 21%. And then this private equity firm comes in exchange for $59 million, they get 30%. But when the IPO launches, that breakdown translates into $85 million for the founders, $36 million for the angel investors, $52 million for the first VC group that kicked in $13 million, $74 million for the second VC group that threw $33 million at it, so they get more than 2-to-1 return. And in exchange for the $59 million, again, that most of which went into just preparing this thing for an IPO, that turns into $106 million going back to the private equity group. So a total of $105 million plus is raised and put together over from the startup stage through Series C funding, and that $105 million turns into $353 million on average. So that's not a bad return. If you turn $100 million into a $250 million profit, of course you have to have the $100 million in the first place. This is how the super rich get richer. At the IPO stage, venture capital groups aren't buying in, angel investors aren't buying the stock, private equity firms or hedge funds aren't buying this. The public is. Your 401k is going into this. Your IRA is going into this. This is when turning a profit actually finally matters. Because now the profit determines whether or not the stock price goes up. So perhaps a CEO is brought in that on paper makes the company look a lot more profitable, and that helps drive up the stock price. Now perhaps all that's done is half the employees are laid off and replaced with contractors, so that it's the same number of people are doing the same amount of work, but Wall Street is like, oh hey, look at that. They're generating the same amount of revenue with half the employees. Or in other words, the ratio of revenue to employee just doubled. That's great. Wow, our stock price went up. Let's give the CEO his $10 million bonus. But anyway, you know, your regular public investors, if you have money to invest, the general public is not getting rich off of this. People invest into a 401k or have an individual retirement account so that they can someday retire, not someday get rich. Those who are already rich, they've cashed out at this point. They're not getting in at the IPO, they're cashing out at the IPO. They're not making money off of a company that's operating for profit. They've made their money before dumping this on everyone else, because that this is the stage when all the money kicks back up to everybody else. So I don't know about you, but this looks a bit schemy to me. And that brings me right back to the first slide, where in a Ponzi scheme, you run out of people, you run out of money to continually feed into the scheme. But what if you didn't? What if there was a theoretical unlimited source of money you could tap into, such as government borrowing, and that fueled the rich continuing to get richer? So what I think is going on, what this graph shows, is that the more the rest of us are put further and further into debt, a debt that has to be paid someday in the future, the more that happens, the more the wealthy continue to get even more wealthy on the backs of the rest of us. This is not a sustainable way of doing things. There is no way we can continue to run up our national debt just to take that money and put it right into the pockets of the super rich. The house of cards eventually has to collapse, and so we have to move away from capitalism before that collapse occurs. We have two options here. We can proactively change things and not deal with an economic collapse, which we came really close to having in 2008. Or we can just let that happen and pick up the pieces later, which is what I think the wealthy are counting on. They probably think that they can buy one of the lifeboats on the Titanic. They can't. We're all going to sink. Climate change is going to affect everybody, so we need to make a change now, but I'll have other videos about that. So I'll wrap this one up here. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please click like below. Please do subscribe, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.